of a place for the groom to take his bride. And that usually occurred right adjacent to the father and mother's house in the Jewish community. Now, remember that ties into what Jesus said in John 14. What did he say? I go to prepare a place for you. So, and then the next one, number 4, is consecration. And that is to deliver at the time for the ceremony a bride that is consecrated. So, in the biblical analogy of between us and Christ in the church, the first two are complete. The contract and the consideration. In process, Jesus Christ is preparing a place for us. And we, the church, are to do what the Apostle Paul says in this Corinthians passage, to make ourselves like a virgin ready to be consecrated to the groom. The 5th one is, maybe I do have a sticky note, is the ceremony. And that's where everybody comes and gathers and the actual exchanging of the vows happens and the ceremony occurs. The 6th is consummation. And we know in the physical sense what that means. That's different in the spiritual sense. And then the last one is the celebration. Let the party begin. And for most Jewish weddings, that usually took more than a week. You know, we have maybe an afternoon or an evening, and we eat and drink and we go home. But for the Jews, this could sometimes be a week-long venture. And that's the passage that I open with in Revelation that talks about the celebration that will occur sometime into the future. So 1 and 2 are completed, 3 and 4 are underway, and the last 3 are yet to come at the end of time. So let's go back and look at the contract between God and us. And we will be in Genesis. We've been in Revelation. We're going to Genesis now, which is probably pretty easier for you to find. It'll be in chapter 15, page 14 of that Bible in the seat. This is the story of Abraham, which begins in chapter 12. And just to give you a quick setting on that, is the very first chapter that we hear about Abraham. God makes a promise to him, I will make you into a great nation, and I'll bless you. And then there's the story of Abram and Lot, and how Abram rescues Lot. And we come to chapter 15, and God promises a son to Abraham. Now, this was one of the strangest chapters that I had ever seen in the Bible, and I've told you many times, as I've had the privilege of growing up in the Christian school system. So again, we took this as a regular, right after world history and after algebra, you would have Bible class. So a lot of these stories are familiar to me, but I never understood what this chapter 15 was about. So let's read it. Well, let's start in verse 5, in the entrance of time. He took him outside, and he is God, and said, look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited to him as righteousness. Now that's a passage you're going to see many times in the New Testament as well, when they talk about Abraham. He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans, to give you this land to take possession of it. But Abram said, O sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? So the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, and each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all those to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. Now, one thing you can almost tell, that as soon as God tells him to go get these animals, it wasn't like Abraham says, now what? He knew what to do. He would cut them in half. And what I have learned from other sources is that this was a way to do contracts in the old world. In fact, I'm told that in the Bedouin communities in the Middle East yet, contracts are still done this way. And it's really interesting. Apparently they dig a trench, they cut these animals in half, and then they lay one half on this side and the other half on this side, and the blood drains into this trench. And then the two parties to the agreement will walk through the blood. And the agreement says, essentially, that if I don't do what I said I would do, may I be like one of those animals. Wow, I guess you're going to see through your contract, aren't you? And this frequently was done for weddings. The two fathers would show up. And the fathers then would make this agreement. In fact, it's not going to be that long, and you might be in a church service sometime around Christmas, and you're going to read that first chapter in Matthew, where it talks about Joseph is betrothed or pledged to Mary. That means they were at step one, the contract. Now, you can also go into the Bible and look in Matthew 1 and find out that Joseph's father was Jacob. Different Jacob than Joseph in the Old Testament, but Joseph, Mary's husband, his father was Jacob. In Luke, most scholars believe there's a genealogy there, but they believe it's Mary's genealogy. Even though it says Joseph, and he was the son of, and there's a man named Heli there. So scholars believe that that was Mary's father. So before Matthew 1 occurs, that if this contractual arrangement was still going on in the New Testament, then Jacob and Heli got together and arranged the marriage for Joseph and Mary. So when you hear that at Christmas, you'll just have that extra understanding. Then the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the fourth generation your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. Now, where in here do we see anything about the contract being done between God and us, the church? Stay with me. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Kadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, Rephites, the Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and the Jebusites. Now, if I've said anything that was wrong, you come up to me afterward and straighten me out. So again, now this is the entire chapter, or most of the chapter 15. And what is the connection here? One of the scholars that I've heard the story from has said that as the sun was setting, all of these elements were in place. The trench, the blood, and all Abraham had to do his half was to walk through. If you look at chapter 17, and we don't have to go there, but there's just one line that God says to Abraham. He says, walk before me and be blameless. And I guess that's still the the admonition to us as well. Walk before God and be blameless. But we know we can't.